Let's move on to the Dark Side of the Ring episode that went down on Thursday night, the double life of Chris Kanyon. And this was one that, I mean, you knew it was going to be like a very, another, tough series of subjects to cover. Chris Kanyon, he was a pretty, well-known enhancement talent in the early portion of his career. He came out of Sunnyside, New York, and began his wrestling career in April of 1992 and bounced around all over the place, but started popping up in Memphis, Smoky Mountain, ECW, and then doing jobs on WWF and WCW television that I'm sure you can find online. But of course, the big break comes in WCW, where he had been part of the Men at Work team that they did show some highlights of.
But more measuring things for no apparent reason, as Chris Jericho said.
Yeah, he did the spots where he would get the measuring tape and measure before he'd do a moonsault off the top and miss the mark or something like that.
That's hilarious.
Just goofy stuff that would be so popular today. But then gets the Mortis character. And when they came up with Mortis, this was Eric Bischoff's huge idea of, you would have these 4 easily licensable characters in Mortis, Wrath, the Cat, Ernest Miller, and then Glacier, Ray Lloyd, as these 4. And that was the whole impetus for Blood Runs Cold. And they ran these spots forever. It became a running joke. And, as they stated here, the NWO took off and Blood Runs Cold, it ran cold. And they didn't really get much of anything out of this. It felt very out of place where WCW was going in this more realistic direction. And yet you had these cartoon characters that just felt like it really emphasized the generational shift of pro wrestling in just really a year's time, where WCW had been doing a lot more of that kind of over the topness with the Dungeon of Doom and such. And now we were moving into a bit of a more serious direction, especially for our main event scene. So that character really never took off much. And, Kanyon noted in his book that he had been told in WCW that, we just don't think that skulls are that marketable, and had to have been amusing as he saw who would become the biggest merchandise seller of all time, right around that same period. But he gets unmasked as Chris Kanyon, and he feuds with the Flock, then got involved in the tag team, which I thought was a very underrated threesome that they had with Chris Kanyon, Bam Bam Bigelow, and DDP as the Jersey Triad. And I remember a pair of pay-per-view matches that they did with Saturn and Benoit that I was a big fan of those matches at the time. And then he went through all the other different characters. He was also the one tasked with Eric Bischoff thought very highly of Kanyon and sent him out as one of the main choreographers for Ready to Rumble when they did the Jesse Ventura movie, which was filmed up here in Toronto. And that was when he was stationed up here, and I remember him doing The Law in studio during that time. And this was when The Law was on at 1 a.m, and he was on it for the whole 2 hours. And I thought he was just the most engaging guest. It's a very down-to-earth person, you could hear when he was taking calls, and very evident that this was such a big wrestling fan. And to me, it was what an interesting guy that this does not come out on television. And in an interesting trivia note, he was supposed to be the guest on The Law the night that Owen Hart died, and they had to scrap their guests. It was going to be Kanyon and Edge on the show, and they obviously had to change everything once that news occurred, because the Jesse Ventura movie was airing the same night as that Over the Edge pay-per-view, which was a brilliant idea by NBC to go against a WWF pay-per-view at the time. But anyway, we don't have to go through his entire career. I think most would be familiar with Kanyon, but he went through many more gimmick changes in WCW. It was positively Kanyon at one point, Chris Champagne Kanyon, and then goes over to the WWE during the Invasion storyline. And, it just, in his book, it's interesting to look at. The WWF period is limited to 15 pages in this near 300 page book. It's a very small portion. And then he's let go in 2004. And then afterwards, that's when he comes out. It's in 2006. And goes on Howard Stern. He did a lot of like publicity stunts to try and get attention on himself, that didn't really work out all that well for him. And it's in 2004 that he's also diagnosed as bipolar. And he cites 11 concussions that he's aware of that he had in pro wrestling. And I think it's those three elements, Wai. Someone that struggled with his sexuality, compounded with just an industry that plays with your head regardless of, someone that is bipolar, that's only going to compound things. And then you throw in the concussions. Like that to me is like what impact each had on the other. Who is to say? But I think the fact is those are three very important factors when looking at the untimely death of Chris Kanyon in 2010.
Yeah, certainly. While you mentioned, many people being familiar with Chris Kanyon, certainly, if you started watching wrestling in the 90s, you'd be very familiar with his various iterations. I think, most will probably remember him for, a period after his wrestling career where he came out and did sort of like the Howard Stern run and whatnot. But I even personally was not really so privy to a lot of his mental struggles that were very much outlined and focused on in this episode, and brilliantly so, and tragically so. I knew him as a wrestling character. I knew him as, this great kind of the innovator of offense. This guy who would always do incredibly flashy, like video game types of moves. But I don't think for a second did I necessarily consider all the incredible inner struggle that he would have had throughout that entire time. And so in this episode, I felt, first of all, you get a real great glimpse as to the amount of people that he influenced just simply as a wrestler. You get to hear from, of course, Brian Cage, who has modeled much of his gimmick or his catchphrases around Chris Kanyon, but also the Young Bucks, who Matt spoke at length about, at one time Chris Kanyon being one of his closer friends and having some, very, hard to deal with conversations with him over the phone, trying to...
When Matt was 19, that's a very tough phone call to have with somebody that, number one, you look at in kind of that hero lens, but on top of that, that's a lot for a 19-year-old, and I think Matt conveyed that, to be so, to hear someone so distraught and knowing that your words could have an impact on life or death.
Yeah, it was Kanyon threatening to kill himself over the phone with Matt Jackson at 19 years old, and so I had no idea. Maybe their relationship was perhaps that deep and that personal. But I think the main, I would say, feature, or at least the main talking head of this episode was James Mitchell, who managed Mortis and remained a close personal friend of Kanyon's up until his death. But he was just so open about everything, to do with Chris Kanyon's life and really his own life, that I found him incredibly captivating. And there were a lot of definitely the Dark Side of the Ring is now really interesting because not only are we assessing the subjects of the episodes themselves, coming off of the Ric Flair episode, we're really starting to assess how the people interviewed are coming across. And James Mitchell certainly doesn't shy away from mentioning some very unsavory things, maybe in his own relationship with Chris Kanyon. At one point, so Kanyon talks about wanting to create a porno tape, just so that he can prove to the other wrestlers that he's not gay. So James Mitchell talks about the story of them hiring a hooker to film this sex tape with a script and everything, and Kanyon never shows up. So, and please correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the insinuation was that James Mitchell took his place and filmed the tape. Is that right?
So Kanyon tells the story in his book, and that's the other thing. Jim Mitchell was extremely close with Kanyon, and Jim Mitchell, you can see he is all over this episode because he is a tremendous storyteller and a showman. But a lot of these stories, the wild ones, Kanyon writes about them in the book. The story about the gay porn magazines flying out in front of his cousin, he writes about that in his book. And he mentions this video. He does not state that it was a hooker. And it's told in the story that Mitchell starts playing this tape for Kanyon, and it's Jim Mitchell having sex with the woman and then putting the mask on, and it's more graphic.
Okay, thank you. But you know that it's very twisted. But I mean, as you mentioned, the story was out there, and Jim Mitchell, at least on national television, was not shy about like putting it out there. And that's just all to say that like he was very much an open book about many of the rough edges in both of their lives, and I goes into I think very tragic detail about some of these. I guess you can call them episodes that Chris Kanyon would have, where he would just almost kind of black out in these kind of violent rages, and not even realize it until after the fact. And it's something that you really kind of your heart breaks for it, because I don't think there would have been any sort of support structure for him at the time. Certainly not in this industry. And you just get the sense that this man was living with a lot of secrets that he had really nowhere to go to for help.
No, and I mean that is the other part of this is his treatment in WWE, and the angle with the Undertaker is focused on, and it's a very it comes off very badly, and it did at the time, that all of a sudden he is being asked to sing like Boy George, and his instructions were they want you to sing like the F word, and that's how he described it in the book as well, and he comes out singing as Boy George with like an exaggerated version of his lisp. And then Undertaker just beats the hell out of him and nails him with the chair from the other side. And he said he did suffer a concussion as a result of this.
Oh, the chair shot was, I mean, as brutal. Rough as you would expect, from a pre-concussion sort of like caring era. Yeah. And you get the Bucks reaction to that, because they were there live, and Kanyon was a hero.
I had no idea that the Bucks were there at that show.
Yeah. So they kind of represented the fan, in many people, being disappointed at seeing a returning wrestler basically get booked to shit. I found it really interesting that you have Raphael Morphy, who. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know. I've only seen him.
He's like the live events coordinator at AEW, and was an executive doing a similar role in WWE for years, and had worked at TNA.
And a close friend of Chris Kanyon's.
Yeah, and until they announced that this episode and he was one of the subjects, I did not know his history with Kanyon.
So he maintains that the WWE, like, there was no malice in the booking of that segment, or at least like they did not book that Boy George segment to punish Kanyon for being gay. He maintains that. Do you have an opinion?
So, and again, like the thing is with Kanyon, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but after he left WWE, he said he made a lot of claims and he said a lot of stuff. And some of it was like there was a goal of getting back with a major company and creating attention for himself. Like, he went so far as to do interviews stating Bret Hart had privately told him Montreal was a work. I mean, he put a lot of stuff out there. And the biggest was he believing that the WWE fired him before he was gay. And that leads to the Howard Stern segment where Flair is kind of sent there on behalf of the company to deny that. I cannot say 100%, but I have a hard time believing that was the reason he was fired. Just based on the fact that I don't think that would have been the sole reason that he was fired. And in the Observer obit, I mean, it flat out states that Kanyon privately told his friends he knew that was not the case, but that was also something that was going to generate, that was going to be a story if he went out and spoke about that.
So that kind of gets into maybe one of the other hot button issues to come out of it, and that was, and I think people expected this, the playing of the Howard Stern clips, specifically of when John Cena and Ric Flair appeared on the show at separate times to basically kind of denounce the talents of Chris Kanyon.
Yeah.
And in Ric Flair's case, I mean, directly to Chris Kanyon, and you just, it's a very heartbreaking scene because, we know that Ric Flair was a hero of Chris Kanyon. So it's certainly like knowing.
And that to me, I thought both Flair and Cena came off very poorly there. It is one thing to say and defend that the company did not fire you because you were gay, but to diminish this guy's talents, I think that is, like, you can say, okay, this guy was not going to be Steve Austin, but he was a tremendous talent. And not included is a line from Chris Kanyon in this to Ric Flair stating, Rick, if I was such a bad performer, then why did you have me work and train your son, David?
Wow.
And he just checkmated Ric Flair on that one. Ric Flair has come out with a statement since then and since last night's episode and, pretty much saying like the WWE, that was kind of part and parcel of adversarial talent or ex-talent that are out there.
I have it here if you want me to read it.
Sure, why don't you read it? I don't have it in front of me.
So Flair tweeted this last night, says, breaks my heart to hear later on that he took this so hard. Calling into guests that were seen as, quote unquote, hostile to WWE was part of the job then. I should not have said that nobody had, quote unquote, ever been released. There's no way I could have known that for sure. I think he means there's no way, he shouldn't have said that nobody had ever been released for being gay, is what he meant. He says, I was holding the company line. Love is love is love is love, and everyone should be able to love whoever and however they choose without fear of reprisal. I wasn't a huge Kanyon fan as a worker, but Chris Klukser, how do I say his last name?
Klukseritz, I think, yeah.
Klukseritz was a hell of a good guy. This was not the last tweet that he would tweet in addition to this thread. He ended it with some sort of like joke that he since deleted about like,
there was like Caitlyn Jenner reference.
And it was a very confusing line. I think it was his attempt at, trying to maybe say that, what am I going to get in trouble for next? I'm sort of this politically incorrect target right now. Like what's going to happen to me? But clearly it was like a terrible attempt at humor in a time that probably did not warrant it at all. And definitely continues to do no favors for Ric Flair's online persona, I will say.
Yeah. Again, like if Ric Flair did not like Kanyon's style, like that's fine. You are allowed to have whatever opinion you have, but let's remember that Kanyon, forget his WCW career where he was tasked with going out to put together wrestling scenes and go recruit cruiserweights. He had a great eye for talent. And in WWE, when he was rehabbing, he was sent down there to OVW. Like they saw, like this was someone that in a post-wrestling career, I think would have been an outstanding producer for his clear openness to the style of the future and this younger generation that I think is very much, there's evidence of in this episode of how your Cages and Young Bucks and probably countless others looked up to. I think he would have been a terrific producer. He was, when Jay Leno came in for the Road Wild match, when Rodman was there to do the Savage match, it was Kanyon that worked with these people to get them ready for these matches. So this was not a guy that was just strictly bell-to-bell wrestler. He was very much involved in training, in choreography. So to diminish his talents in that way, I think that comes off very empty.
Oh, it's super silly. Like anybody who I think has seen him wrestle knows that like the claims of him not being talented enough are ridiculous. And, Flair here, and I'm sure Cena, if asked, would probably claim the same, that they were towing the company line and just kind of like playing a soldier for Vince to, denounce a guy who's been tarnishing the company's reputation. I understand. But
also, I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think that also, and not to say that Ric Flair or John Cena are, I don't know what their response is to that, but, you go out there in public and you're quote unquote towing the company line in a way like that, you have to own that. It is your voice.
Yep.
It doesn't matter if you're just playing ventriloquist, that's on you.
Yeah. And I would say even so, even if you're a great soldier, which we know John Cena to be, and probably Ric Flair as well, I think there is a limit to like what you should be willing to do, to a fellow colleague in your industry. And as you mentioned, John, it's something you absolutely have to own, because you are ultimately the one saying those words. You're responsible for those words. And I felt like if you can criticize anything, it's the fact that maybe these two had very poor judgment, or just maybe even a lack of spine, to say something that perhaps they didn't truly believe.
And to be fair, if the company was releasing him and it was not over his sexuality, they absolutely have a right to defend themselves against that. And I think that's enough that you could have defended and said, hey, the company, not just looking at like a token, but Pat Patterson was a major officer in this company that was openly gay. And that did not prohibit his employment by the company. So anyway, his post wrestling years are very tough on him, and you're going to hear this in this interview, and it's difficult to hear. This is done in 2008, and he talks about the struggles of life after wrestling once you have made it to that level. And that was Kanyon's hope, that was by coming out in a public forum and promoting himself as the first openly gay wrestler that is active, that it was going to be this big thing for him. And by 2006, I mean, it was applauded that he came out, but it was not enough that it was going to, it wasn't shocking either in 2006. And I just think he was looking at it as well from the side of it being, elevating him back into the limelight of the industry, which did not come to fruition for him.
No, that part is kind of, it's upsetting. I don't really know how to take it because, like, on the one hand, you feel for the guy not really having sort of like a role in the industry at the time, but on the other hand, I don't like, it makes me feel kind of uncomfortable thinking that like he'd be like looking at something like that, a very personal thing, as sort of like a gimmick to use. But I think his intentions were also probably to be able to be a spokesperson, be
absolutely,
be
and he was doing speeches, and I mean he was looking at an advocacy role on top of this, because he said that was one of the most difficult things, is that like he realized he was gay like at a very young age. Like I'm talking like 9 or 10 years old, I think is the age he realizes this, and said he had no kind of gay role models, and that was a role he wanted to play. So this was by no means just looking at it from a selfish standpoint. I mean, he wanted to be an advocate for younger people in similar situations.
Yeah. Well, I have to imagine, whether or not he was the first person to come out, or at least, in modern times, I'm sure he still became that role model for many people, as they would kind of detail, in James Mitchell's final evening in person with Chris Kanyon. So yeah, they do kind of, go on to talk about, I suppose, his final days. And, it was surprising to me that it was like him, it was like DDP, who all felt like they had a sense of where this was heading. And it was almost a feeling of like, not surprise, but just, I mean, in like Luke Cox's case, like almost elation that like, his very sick friend finally found some peace. But yeah, really, really sad.
Yeah. And I mean, that's coming from those that would have seen him at his lowest points. And I think looking at that, it was a very tragic end. He took his life in April of 2010, and he was only 40 years old. So yeah, it's a tragic story involving someone that I do believe that he would have been, I think, served a role, especially behind the scenes, in where the wrestling industry was going. It's just the industry was not there yet. And I think he just did not see a place for himself in the industry at a certain point, which, like, let's remember, he is let go by WWE in 2004. And at that point, God, he's like mid-30s, early 30s. Like, that's a very young age to be looking at what's next for me, when he was a lifelong, obsessed wrestling fan. Like, wrestling was his life.
It's for those reasons that I think we should all, no matter what your favorite wrestling company is, we should all be so eternally grateful that there is real alternative right now in the industry. And not just for the fans, but for the wrestlers to perform in. Like, so many of these guys put so much of their entire lives dedication towards one goal. And when it doesn't pan out because there are only so many spots, and this guy at the very top has a very specific taste for who he wants, it's not the end of their stories. And unfortunately for Chris Kanyon, like, there really weren't those options for him then. He was a man like way ahead of his time.
He was, yeah. And I think if you watch, like, just go watch some of, like, whether it's the enhancement matches or his WCW matches, and you can just see, like, where this guy was trying to think and look ahead. And he had a great eye for talent when it came to being tasked with going out and bringing in different cruiserweights. Like, he was very close with Shane Helms, who was not interviewed in this piece, but was very close with Chris Kanyon, as were many people. So we're going to end this now with this interview. This was from Fight Network Radio in May of 2008. And I had reached out to Kanyon to come on the show. And he was very excited to come on, not just to talk about his career, but he was also like big into MMA as well. And like you'll hear at the end here, he very much wants to get his MMA picks in for the upcoming series of cards. But I talk about how this guy's life was wrestling. Like he was very in tune with the pro wrestling media landscape. And I mean, when I emailed him and he responded, like he was very much aware of who I was and asking like, is this the world famous John Pollock? And, I was like, that's not a response I typically would get from guest subjects, but, he was somebody I did not have, beyond that any interactions with him, but I thought this would be a very important interview to run as well with Mauro, who's been very open about his own, struggles and the two of them kind of sharing, those experiences. So this is Mauro Ranallo in conversation with Chris Kanyon.
It is Fight Network Radio, Hardcore Sports Radio, Sirius 186. My guest at this time, a former professional wrestler best known for his work in WCW and WWE. It's my pleasure to welcome Chris Kanyon to Fight Network Radio. How are you, Chris?
Doing great, man. How you guys doing?
Doing very well. Now, Chris, 15 years to the day after you entered the business of professional wrestling, your first fight fighting as Chris Morgan, you retired earlier this year, largely out of the industry now, but you become a frequent guest on Howard Stern. You're proving that, I guess, there is life after wrestling. What have you been doing since you left the Ring Wars?
Dude, a lot of it was the whole coming out process. That took, I wasn't even out to family after Vince fired me. And, it took me a good year of therapy and stuff to just get to, come to terms with that and being able to come out to family and friends. And that took a year. And then once I was comfortable with family and friends, then I went to the, went public with it. And, originally did it up in Sudbury, Ontario, but then I did it on that pay-per-view that clip you guys just played. After that, even after that, there was still, life after wrestling's hard for guys that have made it. I was recently talking to Mean Mike. He's a guy who did some independent stuff around here in Florida and been around the business forever. And ran into him. He's bouncing at a bar, and he's the one that kind of opened my eyes to the fact that guys on the indie scene they all seem to do all right. As far as their regular life and mentally. Once you make it, once you're there for any kind of extended period, to try to live life after that, it puts us in a tough mental spot for a lot of us, and that's why you see so much drug abuse and suicide attempts, and we have trouble adjusting afterwards.
Yeah, and Chris, obviously, you're still in that phase, as you've told us, and having to deal not only with hanging up your wrestling boots, but all of the goings on in your personal life. In 2006, you did come out of the closet. You stated that you believed your sexual orientation was in part the reason that you were let go by WWE in 2004. Do you still feel this way?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. When you're closeted and you're around a lot of guys, a lot of times guys show their true colors, and a lot of the guys that I was with in WCW ended up with power spots and management spots in WWE by the time I got there, and I'd already known they were homophobic. Just because by the fact that I was closeted and they didn't know I was gay, they talked openly about how much they disliked gays, and and then once I got up there, the rumors started in WCW. By the time I got up there, rumors are pretty strong, and I know for a fact that a lot of the guys that were in power disliked gays, and that they either heard the rumors and believed it, or figured there's a chance, so fuck them.
Well, did you feel at the time that you had anyone to turn to, though, in terms of, even though you were closeted and stuff, obviously you must have been feeling the pressure on an emotional basis, knowing what you knew about yourself, because right now, obviously, the wrestling world is dealing with the fact that racism seems to be rampant. We've seen Michael Hayes, a power guy in WWE, recently get suspended for 60 days for dropping the N-bomb on Mark Henry, and I'm just wondering, when you were involved in WCW and WWE, you see that there are a lot of power people that were homophobic. Is that something that is very prevalent in the industry?
Oh, dude, if people were suspended every time they dropped the FA bomb, there would be no management. It's just a lot more accepted to, call people, use the words like fag and queer and, faggot, homo, than it is to use the N-word. So it's just used a lot, especially in that high testosterone environment, a lot in WCW back in the 90s, and it was as well as when I got to WWE in 2001. There's no doubt about it. It's an issue.
Now, did this
to think that Orlando Jordan got fired and it had nothing to do with his sexuality is absolutely absurd. There's no doubt in my mind he was directly fired because he was gay. No doubt about it. Well,
now we've heard he's bisexual, but you feel that is the reason that he was let go is because of his sexual orientation.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They tie it to, he had a friend in the back. It was a younger guy. If it was, if the guys got fired every time they had a younger girl in the back, there wouldn't be much wrestling. I'll tell you that much. But
the ring rats.
Because his was a guy, and they automatically assumed because he was open about his bisexuality amongst the boys that he was fooling around with this dude. They immediately fired him, immediately on the spot. There's no doubt about it. There's no way anyone, and you can sit there and say, once the gays come out and all they do is bitch and moan. There's a chance I wasn't fired because I was gay. Maybe Vince never knew. I definitely felt I was treated by some of his management poorly because of that, and I know for a fact his management lied about me and things I said and did. Did that play into me being fired? There's definitely a chance. But there's no doubt in my mind that it'd be hard for anyone to argue about the Orlando Jordan situation if you know all the facts. It's almost impossible to argue.
Did you receive any positive feedback when you came out of the closet from your peers in the business, or maybe conversely, did you feel the wrath of some of the guys you thought you were friends with once it was made public that you were in fact gay?
You know what, I expected 50-50, especially with, I was online, people either tend to be a little more honest, or they tend to be a little more brutal, even if it goes against how they really feel. They have the anonymity of being able to go on my MySpace and call me a faggot and queer, and there's going to be no repercussions. So I expected about 50%. I had 90 to 95, maybe even 98% positive. And I felt the same with all the guys I told in the business and just overall. But it wasn't 100%. There was a promotion here in Florida that I'm working for regularly, and as soon as that happened, they put me in a lower spot, and then before I knew it, they weren't booking me at all. And, I heard the rumors that it was definitely because of that, but overall, I was able to get bookings easier than I was before I came out. And, the fact that TNA wouldn't bring me back and Vince wouldn't bring me back, who knows what that was all about.
What about your close friends? I know that you were, in storyline and otherwise, you were close to Paige Falkenberg, Diamond Dallas Page, and James Mitchell helped you early on in your career. What is your relationship like with those two these days?
James is gay now. He's my lover. I'm just kidding. I'm sure he'd love it.
You should have seen the look on my producer's eyes. He's like, "Scoop, yes."
No, I'm still. You know what? I haven't lost a single friend and not only in my professional life but my personal life through the coming out process. Not a single person reacted really badly, and a few were thrown for a little bit, and but overall they all came around. Anyone that did have any problem came around, but 95% right off the bat was positive, and a lot of them kind of knew anyway and had a feeling. But I'm still close with Jim, close with DDP. I still talk to him. I'm a bit of a recluse when you're bipolar. You end up spending a lot of time on your own. And,
that's another subject, actually, Chris, that I wanted to touch base with because you don't know this, but I was diagnosed with bipolar affective disorder when I was 19, just getting my career started, and it has been both a gift and a curse, believe it or not. In the last 5 years, thanks to medication, I've been able to maintain and actually flourish in my career. I mean, I've had most success I've ever had in the last 5 years, and I'm just wondering, though, when were you first diagnosed with manic depression, also known as bipolar affective disorder, and what kind of an effect has that had on your career? Because in doing a lot of research and having been in hospital and such, there are a lot of people in our field, like the creative field, that do suffer from it. There's, the mania, if you will, that allows us to stay up all night and come up with all these great ideas and do all this work, and then the flip side, the depression where, one does feel suicidal and one does feel like a recluse, and it can be very devastating on personal relationships, family, and otherwise. And I'm just wondering if you don't mind sharing with us a little bit of what it's been like, not only to be bipolar, but a bipolar homosexual. That's got to be, twice the burden.
Well, yeah, and I think definitely one led to the other. You know, it's definitely a cyclical thing. It's chicken or the egg. You know, there's no way your mood and, you know, if you're up or down is not played into your sexuality and, you know, if you're sexual and your sexual tendencies and stuff like that. So they definitely related. As far as time frame, September 14th of 03 is when I tried to kill myself with an actual suicide attempt. I wasn't diagnosed until June of the following year of 2004. But, you know, I'm writing a book right now. I signed a book deal after my first Stern appearance, and still working on that book. And it makes you re-examine your life. And as I'm going through these years, I'm getting interviewed, you know, at one point it was weekly and for 2 to 3, 4 hours a week. And it makes you revisit your life and your childhood, and you realize I probably had this my entire life. And there's no doubt about it, the way I came up with all those moves, the reason I was coined the innovative offense by Mike Tenay was that I was creative because of the bipolar.
Exactly.
Mania. I could not work out or tan or do anything in my daily life without the mind constantly racing about wrestling and new moves and picturing moves and my matches in my head. And the mind just... For people that aren't bipolar or haven't experienced anything close to mania or, you know...
No, that's really it. And I don't know what it was like for you, Chris, with your family, but, you know, my parents being from Italy, old school, and just friends, they see you having a down day. Oh, don't worry, everybody's depressed. And, you know, just go outside, get some fresh air, not realizing that it is the chemical imbalance that is not going away anytime soon. And then the flip side, they see you one day where you're the life of the... You know, I've been always in TV and radio since I was 16, and I think that says enough right there. Being discovered at 16 had to do with my bipolar, because it was to the point where I'd literally freak people out at the just what I was doing. Like, everything was all hyper, and I knew so much and did so much, and then yet when you crash and you burn and you're there, you know, looking at the ceiling, wondering, okay, is this the day you're going to try something? Then it's an incredible roller coaster ride, and even though Hollywood and society, the stigma's not as much as it once was, there's a great book that I think you should even check out if you haven't already done so, Chris, called The Unquiet Mind by Kay Redfield Jamison. She's a psychiatrist who actually was diagnosed with bipolar. It's an incredible read, and it really allowed me to become even more comfortable with my own diagnosis and be able to say what I'm doing right now, speak about it publicly, because in my industry as well, being a TV and radio announcer, you know, everyone thinks, oh, that guy's got the perfect life. He's always on. He's always in that. And when they realize that, you know, like everyone else, we all have our issues, I feel that I no longer think it's a burden. I carry it with a badge of honor. I know it's weird to say, but being bipolar is, if I can educate people and help people come to grips with whatever they might be going through, then, you know, God bless you with this book idea, and I hope it's nothing but a success for you.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm the same way. I was shocked when I came out and you know, first told people about, you know, my suicide attempt and my bipolar diagnosis, how much attention that got. That got as much attention, if not more, than when I came out of the closet. People were shocked that I was so willing to talk about it, and to me it wasn't... You know, it's a disease.
Exactly. It's like, you know, if a diabetic needs insulin, we need our meds. It's always the same. Because we're not in a wheelchair, you don't have a bandage wrapped around your head. People are like, well, you look fine. What's wrong with you? Everything seems to be okay. I mean, you're a highly functional human being. So what? You know?
Yeah. You know, most diseases, heart disease, liver disease, it's all one of the organs malfunctioning. The brain is the most complex of all the organs. It's the one that the scientists and the medical profession understands the least. And to think that's not going to have malfunctions and problems and chemical imbalances, you know, and to try to explain to people what being up and being down when you're bipolar is like, in regular terms, it's fruitless. You know, the only way to really understand it, I think, is if you had a really good, you know, trip on mushrooms, or if you're taking cocaine. It's that kind of level of a high, and then the exact same as when you crash on coke or, you know, heroin or whatever kind of drugs, that type of crash where you just can't even get out of bed.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of describing it, because that's exactly what it is like. And I'm just wondering now, health-wise, how are you coping with your bipolar?
I've done really well. I was an inpatient last Christmas, New Year's, and my birthday, which would have been not the 2007-2008 holiday season, but 2006-2007. I was an inpatient for 14 days in a institute, and then I did 20 days in a halfway house. And ever since then, it's been now almost a year and a half, and no inpatient stays, no intensive outpatient. I still see my therapist every now and again, and they put me on. It's hit or miss with the medications.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of them that they try to use. I've been on most of them. They put me on lithium at that point.
Yep.
It's one of the older medications, but it's the one that worked the best for me, and it really stabilized me, and it got me refocused. And I am now in Florida, packing up all my stuff out of my condo in Clearwater. Actually, I have a place right across the lake, right across the inlet here from Hulkster. Selling that place, and I'm moving out to L.A., hooked up with the stunt guy from Ready to Rumble, and I'm going to go out there and do some stunt work.
That's awesome. And Chris, that's funny you bring that up, because you were heavily involved not only in Ready to Rumble, but the Jesse Ventura TV movie as well. Working with the actors and celebrities, I mean, you helped train David Arquette, Jay Leno. Were they all in it just for the bucks and the yucks, or did they show respect for your craft?
Arquette loved it. Arquette was, just a huge fan of the business. He was thrilled to be part of it. Leno, I think so, just as a promotional machine for his show. He's a workaholic. It was incredible how hard he worked. He was up, and from what I understand, over at his studio 8:00 in the morning every day, writing and filming bits and stuff. Filmed at 4:30, met us around 6, trained with us literally until we said, all right, that's enough for today. He'd go, I heard back to the studio till midnight, and then do it all over the next day. And he worked his ass off. I mean, he did, he did as much as we expected, if not maybe a little more. We knew we weren't going to get, a physical match out of him, but he gave it his all. And I think it was just a new experience for him. I think he had respect for some of what we did, and a lot of these guys grew up with people like Bruno Sammartino, and they have good memories of the olden days, and they just want to see if they can get involved. And I think that's why Hulk's new thing might it might be interesting. It'd be interesting to see who he signs and what exactly they do.
Yeah, you're talking about the Hulk Hogan celebrity wrestling vehicle that's going to be airing on CMT. When you look back at your career, 15 years long, and of course, you did make it, regardless of what other issues may have been at hand, politically speaking. As you know, the wrestling business is all about politics, but when it comes to talent, you were one of the best, whether it was Mortis, whether it was a member of the Triad. When you look back on your career, what was the most memorable times, whether angle, storyline, or whatever, and then when did you know that maybe this isn't what I want to do with the rest of my life? So let's start with the highs, if you will.
You know what? And that's the great thing about having to write a book. It's just so therapeutic. You forget so much, and it forces you to remember things. I definitely the climb up the ladder was definitely better than once I got there. And that was again a thing. Aerosmith does it best in the song "Amazing," and they say life's a journey, not a destination. I think in the beginning, the goal was so far out there, be a pro wrestler on TV, just to get on my first show, and then to get on my first TV and get on Smoky Mountain and see Jim Cornette run the show in the back and be part of that, and watch Paulie do his thing in ECW in the very beginning. I came in at a very good time. I was lucky enough to, the territories were still kind of holding on. Memphis was still holding on, and Smoky Mountain and ECW were, hot at the time. It was almost like the place to be, and I was lucky enough to be in those places at the right time and to watch things happen. And even getting from Memphis to WCW and I got there literally right as I got there. I started in May with them, and they went live with
Nitro and
Nitro
stuff.
in that September.
Hey,
so
Chris.
I was there at the very beginning.
Yeah, Chris, I don't mean to cut you off, but the time is our enemy right now. But I do want to invite you to come on back, because we just really scratched the surface of your career. But I do appreciate you sharing so much personal information regarding not only your sexual orientation, but the bipolar affective disorder, because I think the more we can educate the people, especially in our roles, being profile people, I think the better it will be for all of us. And I wish you all the luck with your book, and definitely visit us again here on Fight Network Radio.
No problem. And here are my quick predictions on the MMA. I think Faber, Silver, Machida, Shirk, and Lesnar.
Wow, he's an MMA
right
fan.
Down the line there. Faber's no doubt.
Nicely done. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Chris. We will talk to you soon, my friend.
No problem.
All right.
And that's going to bring an end to the show. Both Wai and I would like to extend a thank you to Fight Network for allowing us to run that interview with Chris Kanyon. It was a very important interview to run, and I'm glad that all of you had a chance to hear it. We are going to be back later tonight. We are